Hello, welcome to another episode of Gameworms. I'm Reil, and I'm going to be guiding you through another exciting faction summary. Today we're going to be looking at the Empyrean, which is a new faction that came with the Prophecy of Kings expansion, and I haven't been able to see them in action yet. So I like to do a little bit of lore introduction with all of the factions, because I like playing theme, right? So it's kind of nice to know a little bit, for me, about who you're playing. Well, the Empyrean is a race of strange winged beings that have been around possibly tens of thousands of years before the other great races even got into space. Nobody really knows, the records go back so far, nobody really knows where they originated or how long they've really been out there, but long time. But they haven't been overly involved. They tend to live on the outskirts of star systems, and they don't really engage, or traditionally haven't really engaged much with the rest of the galaxy, but they do watch and learn. So it's, as soon as they see a starcraft come off a planet, they're in there with drones and ships kind of on the outskirts, just observing everything that goes on. So they're watching and learning, know everything about us. What they do with that information, how they collect it, or if they do collect it, or if they just watch, we don't really know because they haven't shared any of their information or findings with us. They do interact. They won't necessarily approach people very often, but they are not generally hostile either. So they have been observed. So most of what we know about the Empyrean is just what people have interacted with them have said. One interesting thing is they don't have visible sensory organs, so they don't really have an eyes or a nose or a mouth or anything like that. And they have wings, and I don't know that they've ever been observed to fly, but people have seen them spread their wings out to gather starlight, so it seems like they either feed on starlight or maybe like us, create vitamins from it like we do with sunlight, with vitamin D. So some people think maybe they have descended from an avian species that did fly on a home planet long ago. I think it might just be they have the wings to increase their surface area to collect more starlight, but who really knows? The one in this picture here seems to be wearing some kind of a friendship bracelet, so they can't be all bad. But actually, it's one of the factions I'm really curious to try from the new factions with the Prophecy of Kings expansion. They seem fairly non-hostile. They have an interesting government in that they don't have one. If you look at their card, they're listed as a government collective with no leadership. What that means is, if there is a decision to be made amongst the Empyrean, just everyone present will kind of just come to a decision together, which they do seem fairly cooperative with, but they're also very slow. So they're the sorts of people that, you ask them a question, they can sit there for a couple hours mulling it over before they finally answer you. So conversations can be long and slow with these guys. Their interest in Twilight Imperium in this competition to see who will be the next ruling empire in the galaxy seems to be that they anticipate great turmoil in the future, even worse than the fall of the Lazacs, and so they consider themselves a neutral third party. So their motivation in the game is they're basically coming forward and saying, look, we've been observing all of you guys for thousands of years, we know everything about you, you don't really have the chops to lead a whole galaxy. We're a neutral third party. We'll be good at this. Why don't you just let us come in and handle things and take over? And it seems genuine. Doesn't seem like they're power hungry. They're just trying to avoid a disaster in the future. All right, well, let's take a look at, one more thing I don't want to forget to mention. They also can exist in a vacuum. So don't go onto their ships without a spacesuit, because they don't really have life support systems. They have some radiation shielding. They have protection from meteors and stuff. But really their ships have it's basically just a vacuum in there. So they have the ability to live just in open space, which is kind of neat. All right, so let's take a look at what they start with. And they start with what I don't want to say is the best new technology, but maybe my favorite, because I like any game that has exploration elements. And TI4, even though it's considered a 4X game, is kind of light on exploration, but now they've added the planet decks with Prophecy of Kings that you can explore planets when you take a neutral planet over. But they've also added Final Frontier tokens, and so you can explore empty space. So when you set up the game, you put these Frontier tokens on the empty spaces. I'll go over this later when I do an explorations video. But essentially, in order to explore these empty spaces, you need to have a technology called Dark Energy Tap, and that's what the Empyreans start with. So right out of the gate, they're, again, living on the fringes of space, and they have the ability to really search, give it a thorough search out in the middle of nothing. They have kind of the ideal starting unit, so they have the 2 carrier, 4 infantry, so spreading out isn't a big problem with them. They also have a destroyer, which I think will be very useful for reasons I'll get to shortly, as well as 2 fighters and, of course, a space dock. So pretty decent, but pretty standard start. The only downside of their start being their home system. Their home system is an anomaly. It's a nebula. And it's the only one I can think of off the top of my head that starts in an anomaly as a home system. It's not necessarily a planet. The inside of the dark is just a big dark area. It might actually be many planets, but they just kind of seem to congregate in this dark inner part of this nebula. It's got a resource of 3, which isn't great. They have 4 influence, which I think kind of just shows that they're somewhat respected amongst the other great races. They're not hated like the necrovirus. Okay, so what do they have for faction abilities? So they have 3. Voidborn. Nebulae do not affect your ship's movement. Now, nebulae, just if you didn't know, that's the technically correct plural form of nebula. So nebula, I went over in my systems episode. You can't fly through nebula. When you leave them, you can only move 1 space. They're not affected by that, so they can go in and through nebula without any problem. They have Aether Passage. After a player activates a system, you may allow that player to move their ships through systems that contain your ships. So again, this is an example. A lot of their abilities are going to be non-aggressive. So this is one where normally you can't fly through another player's fleet, but they can grant permission. It doesn't mean they can do it without your permission, but you can grant permission for people to fly through your fleets. Dark Whispers. During setup, take the additional Empyrean faction promissory note. You have 2 faction promissory notes. So most factions only have 1. They have 2. We'll go over those today as well. Let's start with their flagship, the Dynamo. After any player's unit in this system or an adjacent system uses sustained damage, you may spend 2 influence to repair that unit. So that's absolutely great. And this applies, of course, to the flagship itself and adjacent systems. So even if you're in a next door, and you can do it for other people, so you could have people pay you off, like, hey, I'll repair your newly damaged War Sun. And this is as soon as it's damaged, so it's not like you have to wait between turns. But I feel like, though, if you're going to charge them money, I think you can only exchange it on if it's their turn or your turn. So just a heads up on that. So you might have to, if they're not the active player, you might have to pay later or get money later. But anyways, combat-wise, it's on a 5-up with 2 dice. That's pretty decent. It's a fairly standard attack. It's better attack than a lot of the ships have, actually. Capacity is about the same. But the ability to repair other ships for 2 influence, not bad. Not upper tier, but not bad. What I really like out of these 2, though, is actually the Mac, the Watcher. So you may remove this unit from a system that contains or is adjacent to another player's units to cancel an action card played by that player. So as long as you have a mech in or adjacent to a system controlled by another player that plays an action card, you can block that action card. And what I like about this is only one of 2 abilities in the game that I can think of that allows you to block a sabotage card. So sabotage card is it's an action card that blocks other action cards, but you're not allowed to use a sabotage on another sabotage. The X-Jaw, the turtles, have an ability that lets a racial technology that lets them block them, instinctive training, and these guys have their Watchers. Now you do have to destroy your Watcher to block it, so there's some limited use there, but in a big important action card, that could be a big deal, might be worth it. All right, so let's look at their faction technologies. So again, faction technologies do not come in active. You do have to research them. They have 2 Void Watch, a green technology. After a player moves ships into a system that contains 1 or more of your units, they must give you 1 promissory note from their hand if able. So I think by itself it's not that impressive, but I think it might combine well with their leaders, which I'll get to shortly. I think the only issue I have is that they're just going to there are garbage promissory notes you're probably just going to get. Like, they might give you alliance, which means you can't attack them back, but at the same time it also gives you access to their commander, so, see how that plays out. I haven't been able to see it in action yet, so... But yeah, so anytime somebody activates one of your systems, they have to give you a promissory note. They also have Aether Stream, which is a blue technology. After you or one of your neighbors activates a system that is adjacent to an anomaly, and don't forget that you live in an anomaly, you may apply +1 to the move value of all that player's ships during this tactical action. And this isn't just nebulae, this is all anomalies. So if you're activating a system that just happens to be next to a supernova, you're giving extra movement of all the ships going to that system. So pretty good speed boost on that technology. All right, let's take a look at their leaders. So there's 3 types of leaders, remember. There's the agent, which you start the game with. And then there's a commander, which will give you kind of a permanent ability, but you have to unlock it. And then there's a hero, which has a big one-time use ability that you also have to unlock. So looking at the agent, it is Akamar. After a player moves ships into a system that does not contain any planets, you may exhaust this card. That player gains 1 command token. And I think this is absolutely perfect with their starting technology and units, because remember, they have Dark Energy Tap and they have a Destroyer. So on your first round, you could send your 2 carriers out to 2 systems to colonize a whole bunch of planets, and you still have that Destroyer you don't necessarily need to send out. You could send it to an empty space to explore the Frontier token. But people might say, well, that's kind of a waste of a token. Tokens are very valuable in Twilight Imperium, or the command tokens. And so you might not feel like wasting it to go into empty space, but with this agent, you're not wasting it, you're just getting it back. So you could activate the system, move your Destroyer in, and then, explore the Frontier token, and then you just use this card once per round to get that token right back. So really all kind of synergizes very, very well. All right, so to unlock the commander, so all unlocks are unique to each faction. Unlock is to just be neighbors with all other players, which obviously this is going to scale with difficulty. So this might be really tough to do if there's a lot of, like doing in like an 8-player game. So that might be a trick you have to deal with. But what's his ability? After another player moves ships into a system that contains 1 or more of your command tokens, you may return that token to your reinforcements. Let's say you've had a combat and you attacked somebody's home system or something, and then they come and they retaliate against you. Normally you'd be frozen. You wouldn't be able to send anybody back in again. But with this, if somebody attacks you, you can remove your token, which frees up that system again, which means even if you lose and you have another army or fleet nearby, they can go back in and retaliate that round. Their hero, as with all heroes, are unlocked by scoring 3 objectives. The action is place 1 Frontier token in each system that does not contain any planets and does not already have a Frontier token. Then explore each Frontier token that isn't in a system that contains 1 or more of your ships. Then purge this card. That is the multiverse shift. And that's pretty cool. So that's like you want to do a whole bunch of exploring early on in the game, get all the Frontier tokens collected that you can, and maybe leave a ship in a lot of these systems. And then when you pull this out, you're just getting a whole ton of not action cards, you're getting a whole ton of exploration cards. And an interesting thing with the Frontier deck, so their fragments are wild, so you can combine them with lots of other fragments from other types of planets, and easily just get a bunch of a couple artifacts or something. So one of their abilities that we mentioned earlier was the Dark Whispers, that they have 2 faction promissory notes instead of 1. And going along with the theme of the Empyrean being kind of a more peaceful or diplomatic sort of a faction, these promissory notes seem to be mutually beneficial. So let's take a look at the first one, the Blood Pact. So you don't use this. This is a card you give to someone else, and then they can play it in front of them as an action. So when they play it, when you, the other player you gave it to, and the Empyrean player cast votes for the same outcome, cast 4 additional votes for that outcome. If you activate a system that contains 1 or more of the Empyrean player's units, return this card to the Empyrean player. So basically, it's like a political alliance. It's like every time we vote together, we're adding 4 votes to the total for our side. And then there's the Dark Pact. And this is, again, played as an action. Place this card face up in your play area. When you give a number of commodities to the Empyrean player equal to your maximum commodity value, you each gain 1 trade good. If you activate a system that contains 1 or more of the Empyrean player's units, return this card to the Empyrean player. So this is really nice. So the Empyrean has a pretty good commodities cap. So if I'm the Empyrean player, I probably want to give this to somebody who has another 4 commodity limit. So nobody's really losing out. But whenever you trade, as long as you're trading everything, you're each getting an extra trade good out of it. So if I trade, I think the Soul Federation, for example, Federation of Soul has 4 limit. And if I were to partner with them, I could say, okay, I'll give you this card, you play it, and every time we trade, as long as we trade our max values of commodities, we're each getting 5 instead of 4. So pretty nice little ways to make deals, and you can do that with 2 different people. So ideally, I would think with the Empyrean being kind of such a diplomatic faction, make friends with each of your neighbors, so you kind of want to avoid war maybe. But at the same time, you still got to move around and get adjacent to everyone if you want to get this commander. So I was talking earlier about some of the synergistic abilities of the Empyrean. Seem to work together pretty well. If you can get their commander unlocked, probably easy, not too hard in a 4-player game, probably really rough in an 8-player game. But if you could do it, it's the Suange commander. Looks like, to me, it would go pretty well with the Void Watch, because this means when somebody attacks one of your systems that's like locked, it's I always use the word locked, but more, I think the game term, activated. An activated system. So when somebody moves into your activated system, your Void Watch ability forces them to give you a promissory note, which may or may not come in handy depending what you end up with. But you also get to remove any existing tokens. So there's so many reasons that you're just making people think twice about attacking you, right? And you have so many abilities, even like with your dynamo, like repairing other people's ships, the ability to do that. The ability to give people your use of your Aether Steam. A lot of their abilities, I think more so than most other factions, are able to help neighbors and allies. So, really great, and that's kind of how I like to play. I'm not a big warring faction sort of guy. I kind of like exploration factions and diplomatic factions. So that's one reason I'm really curious to try the Empyrean. So, don't think I've missed anything. Really encourage you guys, if you haven't played this yet, to pick up a copy or find some friends that have a copy and get a game together. There's, Tabletop Simulator if you're in a place like me where you can't really meet together yet. But there you go. Good gaming and good evening.